Yo, what's up guys, it's your boy Sami here. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto had the power of Phoenix, part 8. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, please subscribe to our channel, and like this video. So let's get into the video. When Naruto appeared at the entrance to the Forest of Death, he smiled, and Anko looked at him, and she said, "So, when were you going to tell me about having the snake contract?" Naruto said, "I guess it slipped my mind. I also have a cat, dog, boar, hawk, eagle, toad, slug, spider, scorpion, and a few others, but you never know when you might need one." Anko looked at Naruto like he was crazy and thought, well, at least he is ready for anything, and walked over and kissed him. Just then several others started arriving. Ino was yelling at Sakura for underage drinking, and it could be bad for her if she was pregnant. Naruto sighed and said, "Hey Ino, chill. It's not like they were drugged with medicine to make them get pregnant faster. That would be cruel." Ino looked at him and said, "What are you doing defending them? I thought you hated them." Naruto said, "The emo I can't stand, but Sakura has calmed down now that she got laid. If you notice, she has not bitched back at you." Ino looked at Sakura and sighed and walked over to her teammates. Sakura walked over and whispered, "Little girl tried to enter my mind, but I forced all the alcohol into it when she entered, making her sick. She left quickly after that. Unfortunately, I passed out from the alcohol, but the Kai woke me up." Naruto smiled and said, "Remember the plan. This is going to be fun," and he thought it almost time to pay for my deal with death. They both nodded, and Anko explained to everyone what the rules were and had them get ready. Meanwhile, across town on top of the Hokage monument, Rin was sitting on a blanket on the head of the yondaime, and looked at the note Naruto gave her. "Mom, today I want to show you how much I love you and do something special for you. Go to the Hokage monument and sit on Dad's head after 11 AM and take a picnic lunch and wait. It may be a few hours, but I promise you that the wait will be well rewarded." Naruto. Rin sighed and took a sip of her sake that she brought. She had just arrived and was sitting looking over the city. Naruto smirked as the signal was given and the gates were opened. Team 7 charged in through gate 19, and the Sand team charged through gate 20. 10 minutes later they arrived at the spot Naruto had set up, and Gaara and his siblings hid in a small tree cave Naruto used his bloodline to make. Naruto turned and Sasuke said, "Okay dope, so what's the plan?" As he felt someone arriving in the area. He narrowed his eyes when he could tell it was not who he was expecting, but he recognized who it was. Just then he felt the ones he was waiting for to arrive enter the area. Naruto said, "I think we should head to the tower and make an ambush there." Sakura said, "Instead of that, let's wait." She was interrupted when a huge wave of air came by, and slammed into all three of them, but they used chakra to hold themselves to the ground. Just then 9 figures jumped into the clearing. Naruto smirked and did 3 hand seals and slammed his hand on the ground, and said, "Sealing art, Kitsune force field." And a red bubble surrounded everything in a quarter-mile radius. Sakura said, "What's going on here?" The Rainin walked forward and said, "I have come for the Uchiha, and also to kill your teammate little girl." Sasuke said, "I don't swing that way. The 4 eyes over there probably do though." Kabuto said, "Please let me humiliate him for Orochimaru-sama." A swirl of sand appeared beside Naruto and Gaara was standing there, and he said, "Sorry, but your dance card is full with me." Sasuke said, "So who wants Mr. Emo?" Naruto said, "You can deal with Kabuto teammates, and Sakura can work on the 3 sound genins. I will take Orochimaru." Laughter was heard and the Rainin reached up and pulled his face off and said, "So tell me how you know it was me." Naruto smirked and said, "Simple. Like any good pimp, I always know where my bitches are." Orochimaru narrowed his eyes and said, "Today you die boy, and your grandparents can't save you." 2 sets of laughter were heard and Sasuke and Sakura shimmered and were replaced by Tsunade and Jiraiya said, "We won't even have to enter the fight with you and him. He is stronger than all of us. Let's get the party going." And charged toward the 2 teammates of Kabuto. Kabuto looked at Gaara and said, "It looks like I will have to have some fun with your sister after all." Gaara smiled and said, "What do you know about Kabuto?" Kabuto pulled out a card and said, "I know you are the Kazukige's son and also the vessel for Shikaku, but you don't seem to be able to control it, because you don't really use his power. Why?" Gaara chuckled and looked at Naruto and said, "Is he really that much of an idiot?" Naruto never took his eyes off of Orochimaru and said, "Yes, but don't forget he has advanced healing like ours, so make sure you destroy his body completely, not just bones and muscles." Kabuto narrowed his eyes and said, "Then how do you know that boy?" Naruto said, "One demon knows another weasel." And he put his hand on the hilt of his sword and started walking toward Orochimaru. Orochimaru looked at Naruto and said, "Today you die." And sent out some snakes to attack Naruto, and a wall of earth came up in front of Naruto and blocked the snakes, as Naruto continued to walk forward, and the wall crumbled to the ground for him to not stop. Orochimaru was surprised and started to do some hand seals, and breathed out several small fireballs at Naruto, only to be intercepted like the snakes, but this time by a wall of water. Naruto made it about 10 feet away from Orochimaru, and said, "So how do you like Kyuubi?" Orochimaru looked at him and said, "What does that damn fox have to do with you using attacks without hand seals?" Naruto chuckled and said, "You misunderstand me. I was not referring to the fox that used to be in my stomach before I absorbed him. I was referring to my sword." Orochimaru looked down at the sword Naruto had his hand on that was still sheathed and said, "What does that little toy have to do with anything?" Naruto smirked and said, "My sword is a specialty sword I made, and had the seals put on myself, so no one would learn about the secrets. Want to know what it does?" Orochimaru smirked and started doing hand seals in his coat sleeves, and said, "Fine, humor me." Just then a scream was heard. A few moments before, Jiraiya was attacking both of Kabuto's teammates and they jumped away. One suddenly charged at Jiraiya and put his hand on Jiraiya's back, only for Jiraiya's hair to turn into spikes and stab the ninja's hand. He jumped back and started to do hand signs when suddenly a voice behind him said, "You blew it." And he was encased in darkness. Jiraiya smirked as the puppet captured the nin, and another puppet came over with swords sticking out of it, and it increased the first puppet, and the only sound that could be heard was a scream, as flesh was cut to pieces. Tsunade punched the ground and picked up a huge slab of stone, and chunked it at the 3 sound nins, only for one of the nins to stick up his hands and blow the stone to pieces. He smirked for a moment until a female voice said Kamitachi no Jutsu, cutting whirlwind technique, and it hit the stones that had been blown to smaller pieces, and hurled at the 3 sound nins. The same sound nin tried to blast the stones again, but unfortunately he had taken his eyes off of Tsunade during the attack, and was on the receiving end of a huge leg drop from in the sky. It hit his head, snapping his neck and sending him face first into the ground dead. The wall of sand came up around Tsunade to block the stones that flew by where the other 2 sound nins had been a moment before. Kabuto looked at this and charged at Gaara and said, "You should never take your eyes off of your opponent," and tried to attack with his chakra scalpels. Unfortunately, since Gaara did not have assassination attempts on his life, no one knew about his ultimate defense except for family. The sand caught Kabuto's hand, and a Sin clone of Gaara appeared and held Kabuto in place. Gaara sighed and said, "You are an idiot," as he watched the rest of the fights going on. The 2 nuns who arrived with Orochimaru looked at what was going on, and one said, "Should we fight them, Orochimaru-sama?" Orochimaru, who was busy looking at Naruto, said, "No. My nins can handle those old has, and never will be. If they can't, then they don't deserve to live. Stay put, because after I'm done with this boy we will find the real Uchiha." Naruto started to laugh. His laughter was so hard all fighting stopped, and Orochimaru said, "What a funny boy." Naruto wiped an imaginary tear from his face, and said, "You really are an idiot when it comes to sealing, aren't you? Did you forget that little I did when you first arrived? We are all trapped here until I release it. No one can enter, or leave until I drop it, and it don't matter if I am dead or not. It is powered by all the plants in this forest, or, as I like to call it, home." Orochimaru said, "We will see about that, boy," and went through the hand seals to summon Manta. When he hit the ground, Manta appeared and started to rise, only to hit and crack his skull. Orochimaru, who was on top of Manta, was like a pancake and said, "Hurry and leave Manta. I can't breathe." Manta hissed and said, "Will you summon me again, Orochimaru? I will kill you," and left in a puff of smoke. Naruto charged at that moment and pulled his sword out while still covered in the smoke, and sliced the ninja on the left across the neck, and killed him silently, before he turned only to intercept a sword made out of bone. Naruto smirked at this, and suddenly the other 9 received 7 slashes across his back, and a tree root started to wrap around his body. He then quickly sheathed his sword. Orochimaru, who was panting, finally looked up and saw Naruto was gone, and then heard a cry of pain behind him, and turned only to pale. His next body until he got Sasuke was laying on the ground without a head, and the leader of his Sound 5 was trapped in a tree root, and had what appeared to be 8 Naruto standing around him. Orochimaru stood up, narrowing his eyes, and thought, I try wouldn't work because he can counter them without trying, thanks to that sword somehow. I could create a few clones, but for some reason the ground around here is not acting normal. I tried to go underground only for nothing to happen. Is it because of that barrier? Let's see if I can get some answers. And said, "Okay boy. I know you have skills, but this has finally piqued my interest. How are you doing this without hand seals?" As he placed one hand up to his chin with his index finger running along his cheek and the other one on his belly. Naruto knew what he was fixing to do and said, "Simple really. Any and all I know this sword knows. It is sentient. That is not why it can do without hand seals though. That answer is simple. As long as I touch the sword it can read my mind and knows which I want to do and performs them for me." Orochimaru was surprised by this and said, "But how can this sword do that? It would need chakra." Doing the one hand seals by his belly. Naruto took a step away from the prisoner he had now and said, "It does have chakra. Over the years I have added all my extra chakra into it. This word literally has 9 taels worth of chakra. I joked around before and said it only had 1 tael's worth when people ask. No one has ever actually seen what it really can do. That is until now." And he charged at Orochimaru only to intercept the grass cutter that came out of his mouth and block his strike. Orochimaru jumped back and grabbed his sword and said, my boy. You surprised me. Any normal blade would have been destroyed by a grass cutter like that." Naruto, who put his blade pointing at the ground, smirked and started channeling chakra around the blade. 1 ring of energy, then another, and so on until 9 rings of energy were going around the sword's blade, and Naruto said, "Roar for me, Kyuubi." And he charged Orochimaru. Gaara could not believe what his opponent just did. He looked at Kabuto and said, "Do you think I am afraid of blood or something?" Kabuto was treating the wound on his hand where he stabbed himself trying to get it free from Gaara's sand. Kabuto said, "No, I was trying to get free." Wrong choice of words, and Gaara said, "Fly free, little bird." And his sand wrapped around Kabuto and hurled him up into the air, only for him to bounce off the barrier walls and fall back toward the ground. He would have had a soft landing if Tsunade did not ran underneath him and jumped up and put a fist in his back and sent him back up into the air toward the barrier. After rebounding a second time off the barrier, he was breathing heavily only to feel his arms control go haywire, and he punched himself in the nuts. He groans as he covers them with his other hand, only for it to grab him and squeeze painfully. He cried out and the sound of laughter was heard. He looks up and sees the boy in makeup with what looks like chakra strings running into his arms. He realizes what is happening and channels all his chakra as he can to cut the string. He starts panting and slowly starts to stand up, only to receive a very painful hemorrhoid check with a female voice saying to Mari 10,000 years of death, as her fan went up his ass. He was sent flying toward Tsunade, who dropped back and punched him toward Jiraiya, who powered and slammed it into Kabuto back to launch him back toward Gaara, who had a grin that would make proud. Gaara had his sand turn into a javelin that went through Kabuto's skull down his neck and back to come out his ass and be held in place. Jiraiya did a Katen Kakaki no Jutsu, fire release. Great fireball technique, and set Kabuto's body on fire. Jiraiya asked, "How do you like your meat? Well done or burnt?" Everyone said burnt. Tamari looked around and saw the guy Naruto had trapped in tree roots and Orochimaru and Naruto facing each other preparing to attack, and asked what happened to the last three. "After my attack I did not get to see what happened because I was distracted by the summoned smoke." Jiraiya said, "After your brother mutilated the one guy with his puppets, I used the Doten Yominuma, Earth Release, swamp of the underworld, and sucked him out of all his chakra, and then let it consume him. The other two I don't know." As he looked over at Naruto and saw him moving his lips, but could not hear what he was saying. Tsunade, who was also looking, said, "When your brother encased me in the sand to protect me, I used the Earth's style Headhunter Jutsu and dug under them. They were close together, so when I broke the ground I was able to pull them both down." The guy unfortunately hit that metal device on his arm as he went down and caused both him and his teammate to die from the sound wave, blowing their eardrums away. Luckily I was underground so the sound did not get me. What the hell? As she watched the energy start surrounding the Naruto blade. She had seen Naruto use it a few times, but he was so quick, and he refused to answer any questions about what was so special about it. When he was training under Zabuza he always used a standard katana he bought at a weapon shop. Jiraiya was also shocked by the display. He had never seen anything like it before. Then he heard a scream of roar from Mikayubi, and Naruto disappeared in a yellow flash. Naruto charged in a yellow flash, only to appear behind Orochimaru putting his sword back into its sheath. Orochimaru blinked and suddenly spit out blood, as his grass cutter fell to the ground in 3 pieces. He fell onto his knees a moment later coughing up a lot of blood, and he asked how. Naruto turned and walked around Orochimaru, wiping some blood off of Orochimaru's mouth, and started to draw a seal on his forehead, and he said, "I have mastered over 11,000. I know 30 different sword styles. I have the power of the most powerful demon ever in my body, and I have been training to fight your former leader Uchiha Madara." With a sadistic smile on his face. He starts doing hand seals and stops screaming Shiki Fujin, corpse demon seal exhaustion, and starts doing more hand seals before screaming Kuchis. Ito Tensei, summoning. Impure world resurrection, and started doing even more hand seals. As both Jiraiya and Tsunade run over after hearing the first sealing method. They both knew that they were losing a son to it. Naruto continued to do hand signs, as his eyes glossed over, and after 200 hand seals he said, "Sealing arts. Phoenix of the immortal fire." And he started to pant. Suddenly the sky turned dark around the area, and Orochimaru was scared, as he saw a figure appear in the air, and he asked, "What is that?" Naruto said, "I am paying for my death." The figure said, "So child of the fire. Have you decided this time?" Naruto said yes, and, as we agreed, here is your soul in exchange for the other. Pointing to Orochimaru. The figure looked at Orochimaru and said, "I have been waiting patiently for this soul for some time. I agree. 1 soul for 1 soul. 1 body for 1 body. Know this, child. You cannot start over again." Naruto nodded and said, "Do me one last favor. Tell the fox I said thanks." The figure pulled out his knife and walked over to Orochimaru and grabbed him before cutting him and eating each of his limbs. The figure then, after finishing, reached into his stomach and pulled out his spirit and puked blood and flesh over the spirit. Everyone was shocked, disgusted and interested all at the same time. Finally the spirit went face first on the ground, and the figure said, "See you in time, kid." And he disappeared just like he came. Naruto started to cough and spit out some blood, as he fell to the ground on his knees. He smiled and said, "Thanks to Shinigami and you, also Kyuubi." He sat there for a few minutes. Tsunade finally walked over to him and asked, "Are you alright?" Naruto smiled and said, "Like I told you. I break all odds. Perhaps you should check on your son now." Tsunade blinked and turned back toward the body that was on the ground when it groaned and slowly stood up, but was naked, and he turned, making everyone except Naruto gasp. Jiraiya said in a stuttery voice. Arashi. Is it you? Arashi looked around and blinked a few times and said, what the hell? Last thing I remember was fighting some damn fox and telling my son I'm sorry. He then received a scroll upside the head and turned and blinked, and Naruto said, get your old ass dressed, dad. I don't want to look at it. Arashi blinked and looked down only to turn red, as he realized he was naked. He grabbed the scroll and walked behind a tree and started to change. Naruto sighed and said, Gar. Come here for a minute. Gar walked over and asked what. Naruto fell back on the grass face up and said, use your sand and pull my sword out of its sheath and lay it on my chest. Don't touch it with your body or it will kill you. Gar nodded and did, as told. Naruto closed his eyes, and suddenly a green glow surrounded him and his sword for a few minutes. When he opened his eyes, everyone was around him looking at him, and Arashi was dressed and said, what's going on? Naruto stood up and said, I just restored some of my chakra. I use about 90% of my chakra to bring you back. Now if you will excuse me, I have one more thing to take care of. As he walked toward the clearing where the headless body he killed earlier was, and he acted like he was going to sheath his sword, only to drive it into the ground quickly, and then twist the blade. He then pulled it back out of the ground, and it was covered in blood. Tamari asked what the hell was Narukin. Naruto sighed and said, a spy. Gar, can you do the honors? I don't want to use chakra anymore for a few minutes. Gar nodded and used his sand to move the ground, and a Venus flytrap-looking man fell on the ground dead. Naruto reached down and removed a ring on his finger and threw it in the air, cutting it to pieces with his sword before sheathing it. Arashi looked around and said, would someone please explain what the hell is going on, and how I am alive, and is it my son? Naruto walked over and activated his eyes and touched Arashi on the forehead and said, memory implant. He then did a few hand seals and said, Kitsune force field deactivate. And a white light was seen. Arashi blinked a few minutes and said, I am going to kill them. Naruto said, not now, you're not. You have a date waiting on your head in the village, and she has waited a long time for you. There's a marker there so you can use the Hiraishin. Arashi nodded and was gone in a flash. Naruto sighed and said, did any of them have any scrolls? Kankura came back and it worked out where they had 2 sets. Naruto nodded and looked at his grandparents and said, go get the 2 idiots and bring them to the tower. Gar, I hate to ask, but can you get me? And he fell face first on the ground. Tsunade ran over and checked him and sighed before saying, chakra exhaustion. Would you mind, Gar? Gar smirked and said, what's family for? And he grabbed his family and Naruto, and they all disappeared in a swirl of sand. After the sand sips and Naruto left in a swirl of sand, Jiraiya looked over at the guy stuck in tree roots, and said, so what should we do? Tsunade had a couple of tears running down her face and said, I don't care. Our son is back alive. Jiraiya smiled and the guy said, please let me go so I can kill you all. Orochimaru-sama is dead. Jiraiya smirked and said, my ass never felt safer than it does right now. The guy screamed out in frustration and tried to activate his curse seal, only for the roots around his body to get tighter, making him stop. Tsunade looked at him and said, the more chakra you use, the tighter it gets. Then he pulled out a flare and shot it into the air and grabbed Tsunade, and they both disappeared in a swirl of leaves. A few minutes later Abnu appeared, and when they saw the scene around them they asked what happened. The idiot was so devoted he said, they killed Orochimaru-sama. Let me go so I can kill them. The Abnu sweat dropped and Hibiki and Anko appeared, and Anko looked around and said, where's Orochimaru? The guy screamed and started to cry, and the Abnu said he said they killed him, but I don't see a body. Jiraiya appeared right then, and Hibiki asked where's Orochimaru's body. Jiraiya started to laugh and said he is in the belly of the death god right now. They made a deal with death. Anko started to cry and said is Narukin dead, starting to freak out. Jiraiya snorted, making her give him a death glare, and he said nope. He made a trade. Orochimaru for Arashi. Everyone sweat dropped and Hibiki said how. Jiraiya said I don't really know, but he used most of his chakra to do it though. Hibiki sighed and said then it is probably impossible to do it again. Only he has enough chakra. Jiraiya nodded and looked at the guys still in the trees, and said he's one of Orochimaru's, so watch him. He uses bones from his own body and attacks. Hibiki nodded and said go find Yamato and have him free this ass and take him to my playroom. As he turned to look at Anko and Jiraiya. Anko sighed and asked so how is Gaki going to tell everyone about why his team is there? That Shino kid already figured out you were fakes before the test, according to the surveillance videos. Jiraiya sighed and said who knows. He has a plan so I wouldn't worry. I got research to do. And he left in a swirl of leaves. Anko sighed and went to the tower to wait for all the teams. Rin was drinking a sip of sake when she felt a chakra pulse behind her. She sighed and put her glass down without looking back and said so who is this surprise my son set me up with? The voice that made her freeze on the spot said I don't know Claus. He just told me to come here. Rin turned slowly to look at the figure behind her, and her eyes got bigger as each inch closer she got to him. She was at this point on her hands and knees turning completely over, and she whispered Arashikin. Arashi smiled and said, I know that position pretty well if I were, as he was tackled to the ground, and had a pair of sharpened canine teeth embedded into the side of his neck, as two sets of claws grabbed onto his side and ripped into his flesh. He hissed, as they stopped trolling. Rin, after removing her mouth from the side of Arashi's neck, moved her hands to her mouth and licked the blood off of them, and looked up into his eyes and said, It is you, but how? Arashi smiled and said, My little claw, what have I told you about going for blood on the first strike? Rin smiled and blushed and said, Never draw more than you can stand, because the moment you do you will be unable to stop the blood flow. Arashi leaned down and kissed her on the lips, and she led them to her room. When the Sand Sips and Naruto arrived in the tower, it had only been 4 hours since the second test had started. Naruto was still passed out, but Temari went to treat him for any wounds. She checked, and beside a small cut on his hand he was fine, and the cut was healing fast. She sighed and looked on at her fiancé with pride and admiration. A few moments later Kakashi, Shizune and Tsunade arrived with Sasuke and Sakura, who were still in a medical coma. Kakashi looked over at Naruto and said, So what exactly happened to my student? Naruto, who had his eyes closed, said, I kicked a Sanin's ass, killed an S-class missing nin, made a deal with death and survive. What's it to you? Making everyone's sweat drop. Tsunade walked over and started to run a medical on him, as her eyes got bigger and looked at him and asked, How are you restoring chakra so fast? Naruto sighed and said, My sword. When I had Gaara place it on my body earlier, it activated the medical seal I placed on it, and it has been pumping chakra back into me. I say in about an hour I should be back at full strength. Gaara's eyes were big and he said, But that's impossible. You have more chakra than all of us put together. How can your sword have that much chakra in it? Naruto smirked and said, That's one of the many reasons I named it Kyuubi. As you know, every person spends a little chakra to live, and when we are not doing nothing, but walking or whatever besides battle, the rest of our chakra is just stored to a point where we don't produce more. My sword has 2 important seals I placed on it. One is whenever I am not using more than 5% of my chakra, it is draining 10% off of me. However, if I run out of chakra I can place it near my heart, and it sends the chakra back into me. Kakashi said, But you could only hold so much chakra in your sword. Not enough to fully restore you. Naruto chuckled and said, That's another reason for the name. Kyuubi was known for having unlimited chakra. 10% of my chakra is enough chakra to make Chitterus all day, Kakashi. The sword compresses and stores unlimited amounts of chakra. I could restore myself at least 100 times before I ever put a dent in this sword. I have been charging it since I was 5 years old in Kakashi. Think about it. Now someone will put me in a room to sleep. My body is locked up so I can't move from the deal I made. I lost over 90% of my chakra in 4 minutes, so I was in shock. When I recover I will take care of the butch and his bitch. As he fell asleep, just then Enko arrived and looked at the group and said, Will someone tell me what is going on? Kakashi was pale, as he looked at the sword, and he started to reach for it to get a better look, when Gaara's sand wrapped around his hand and Kakashi looked at Gaara and he said, Naruto made me use my sand, to put it on his body. He said it would kill me, if I touched it. Kakashi nodded and Enko screamed in frustration. What's going on? I know that Orochimaru died, but why is Naruto out cold, as well as his teammates? Everyone looked at each other, and Kankuro said, We will let Naruto explain when he wakes up again. As he ran into the tower to get away from her. He had heard stories from Naruto about his other fiancés. Enko looked at his retreating form and asked what's his problem, making everyone wonder. Kakashi sighed and said, So what's the deal with death? Just then the sounds of a wild animal was heard echoing across the forest of death and into the tower. Everyone looked out the doors, and Kakashi took a step backwards and said, The last time I heard something like that was about 9 months before the Kyuubi attack. I wonder what is making those noises, and why it is returned now. Tsunade and Temari looked at each other and then burst out laughing, as they grabbed Naruto and took him toward a vacant room in the tower. Kakashi sweat dropped and looked at Enko and asked, Can you help me with these two? Pointing towards Sasuke and Sakura. Enko smirked and said, Sorry Kakashi, they're your team. As she turned to follow the others. Kakashi turned to look at Gaara, and Gaara stuck out his hand palm up. Kakashi looked at him and he said, I'm not a taxi service. You want my help for $50 per step. Kakashi paled and said, Fuck it. As he created a cage bunchen and picked up his students and followed them to the room where Naruto was being put in a bed. Kakashi puts his other 2 students in the same bed, and thinks it's not like it has not happened before, and turns to leave only for an arm to block his path. Kakashi blinks and looks at Tsunade, and she says you are going to stand guard over them until Naruto wakes up and revives the other 2. Kakashi just nods and sits down in the recliner and pulls out his book and starts to read. Tsunade has a vein pop up in the book, but turns to the others in the room and screams out. And everyone leaves quickly, not wanting to get hurt by a. Kakashi sighs and looks at his students and asks, How did you ever deal with this sensei? As he pulls out his book and starts to read. The next morning Naruto woke and got out of bed and looked around and saw that Sasuke and Sakura were in the same bed, and Kakashi was asleep in a chair. He smirked as he put his hand to his chin and thought, I wonder what I should do to them now. I need to ruin Sasuke's hopes of ever having children, so I need for something to happen to make them question that. I also need to explain to them how we got to the tower and the first test. Shit, I need to deal with Shino since he detected the exchange and probably a few others, as he snapped his fingers, as a thought popped in his head. He walked over and placed a hand on both Sasuke and Sakura's forehead and said memory implant. The voice behind him said, so what exactly is that, huh Naruto? Naruto turned and saw Kakashi looking at him with his arms crossed in Naruto's side, and said it's a version of the Umenko family that I came across in my travels. It lets me replace the events for up to a week in people's heads, so they will forget what really happened, or in this case, when they are here without having to actually be in the exams without knowing. Kakashi looked at him and thought for a moment, and asked how many times have you used it on your teammates? Naruto thought for a moment and said 2 times today. The first was on the wave mission. You don't remember, but the Miss Suifart said something about me that compromised my position of skills and put this mission in jeopardy. I informed the Hokage of it so he knows if that helps. I had to use it on you also, which I hated, but you had already decided to use that info to help the teamwork, and that would have made the situation with the Orochimaru even worse than it was. Kakashi put his book on his lap in his weapon pouch and stood up and said, what are you not telling me, Naruto? You are way beyond a genin level. Hell, you are probably beyond me. Naruto chuckled and wrote something down on a scroll and tossed it to Kakashi and said, I will make you a deal, Kakashi. I will tell you everything tonight at my home, but you have to find and bring all of the adults, as well as the little heirs tonight at 7 p.m. for dinner, and be ready to see ghosts from your past. You must bring them all even if you have to kidnap them. I will get the teams. And he disappeared in a swirl of flames. Kakashi opened the scroll and paled at the list of people on the list. He cursed, but he needed answers more than ever now. To find out someone has messed with your memories and not know it was unnerving. He left in a swirl of leaves to get to his task. Naruto appeared in front of Team 8 as Kurenai was explaining the rules of the second test. Everyone was shocked by the unexpected flame. Shino raised an eyebrow, and Kiba said, what the hell cuz? Naruto sighed and said, thanks for keeping Shino. Tonight you and your team are invited to dinner at my home at 7 p.m. Don't worry, you won't get into trouble. Here can get you there. Sorry, but I have a lot to do. By the way, Orochimaru died. And he left in a swirl of flames, leaving 4 shocked faces. Kurenai smiled and said, it worked, ha, Narukin. Their team looked at her, and Hinata asked in a stuttery voice, what do you mean, sensei? Kurenai looked over at her team and said, just wait till tonight. Go get some rest and change into cleaner clothes. I will pick you up at 645 tonight. And left in a swirl of leaves, leaving a confused team. Naruto appeared in front of the sand team, and Baki blinked and said, so Naruto, what brings you here? Naruto looks around the room and sees Gaara and Kankuro both laying on the beds looking at him, and he walks over and leans on the wall next to Baki, and holds a finger up saying one moment without words, and the door to the bathroom opens up, and Temari walks out dressed in loose casual clothes. She blinks and walks over and pulls Naruto into a kiss, and after a few moments they break apart, and Naruto says, to answer your question, I am having dinner at my house tonight with a few guests. It's a little formal affair at 7, but don't get too dressed up because it will be a long dinner. I hate to do this, but I still have a few others to see before then. And he flames away. Gaara sighed and blinked, and Temari looked at her brother and said, so are you going to invite this mysterious woman you met the other day, Gaara? Gaara said, you know we can't leave the forest of death. Temari smirked and said, whoever said anything about leaving the forest? Use one of your sand buncheons to ask her, or is my little brother afraid of her? Gaara shot her a look and Kankuro snickered until Gaara said, at least I am interested in women. Kankuro coughed and asked what the hell that was supposed to mean. Baki snorted and said, I believe he is talking about how you always spend time with your puppets, instead of looking for a woman. Kankuro sighed and said, you're just jealous that I could have any woman I want. Temari gave an evil grin and said, bet little brother. Kankuro looked at her and paled and said, I hate your fiancé. He rubbed his gambling addiction on you. Temari smiled and said, and after we are married he will be rubbing more than that. Baki shot backwards with a nosebleed, and both Gaara and Kankuro paled and said at the same time, please don't talk about your sex life, sis. She smiled and said, find a woman before dinner tonight. As she grabbed her bag and went back to the bathroom only for a wall of sand to block her path. She looked at the wall and a dark aurora appeared, and Temari said, Gaara, do you know what the punishment is for messing with a woman when she is getting ready for a date? Gaara's hand dropped, and he started to back away from the now demonic-looking Temari. In the room with Sasuke and Sakura. Sakura started to stir and, as she got up, memories flashed in her head, and she screamed before running out of the room looking for a medic. Alerted by the scream, Anko appeared and asked what's wrong. Sakura recognized the woman and said, it's Asukakin. He tripped in the forest when we were looking for our scrolls, and he fell on a tree limb crushing his nuts. Naruto used a medical on him, but said he would never have children. I don't believe him, so please get someone to check him out before it's too late. With tears going down her face. Anko had to hold it in to keep from laughing at that story. She nodded and left to get a medic, and thought what a klutz. Naruto sighed as he appeared in the Forest of Death. He had already felt the chakra signal for Team 9 and 10. Both teams were looking at each other. Naruto closed his eyes and felt around the forest for two teams. He found them and put his hand on his sword before disappearing. Team 9 or Team Guy, as some called it, were looking at Team 10. Neji had activated his bloodline and looked at each of the opponents and sighed before saying, "Don't waste our breath. They don't have the scroll we need." Lee pumped his fist in the air to shout about the power of youth, only to meet a body that was falling from the sky above them. Everyone was caught off guard by this and looked around and saw 5 other bodies falling one after another, appearing out of thin air in less than 2 seconds. Neji had activated his eyes and was looking, and all he saw was blurs of chakra leading to and from the clearing. He looked at the teams and noticed that they had a total of 3 scrolls, and 2 of them were the ones they needed. He walked over to the guy Lee had punched and grabbed the scroll before taking off toward the tower. Tenten and Lee looked at each other and then took off after him. Ino watched them leave and asked what was that all about and what happened. Shikamaru sighed and started to search for the other men, and found the scroll they needed and said, "This just got troublesome." Naruto appeared in the clearing immediately after that and said, "Get to the tower. You all have a dinner arrangement tonight at 7 p.m. Get dressed and cleaned up." And disappeared again, still with his hand on his sword. Shikamaru looked where he was and Choji asked how he did that. Shikamaru muttered, "Troublesome. Come on," and started toward the tower. Naruto appeared back in his living room and saw his mother and father both cuddling in a blanket on the couch. Arashi's eyes were as big as a silver dollar, and he said to Naruto, "What did you just do?" Naruto sighed as he walked over to the wine cabinet and got a bottle of sake before putting his hand on his sword, and 10 Kagebunshin appeared and went into the kitchen, as the original walked over and sat in his recliner and said, "I call it flash step. It's like oration, but requires no seals." Arashi sat up and said, "But how? I worked for years on that theory and never even came close." Naruto sighed as he took a sip and said, "It only requires 2 things to actually use it. Either you have to see what's in front of you or know exactly where you are going to appear. This carries you up to 100 yards on the initial takeoff, or if it's a long distance travel, then it slows you down enough the last 100 yards to make sure your stopping spot is clear. I incorporated it into Kyuubi here because the chakra control required is incredible, but it also uses very little chakra." As he sets the bottle down, Rin looks at her son and asks, "How did you do it?" Naruto sat back and closed his eyes and said it all started when. Flashback to a previous life. Kyuubi was in his cage and looked at Naruto and the Shinigami that had just appeared, and Kyuubi smiled and said, "Hey, since the kid has been using the phoenix power like he has, what's to stop him from always using it, and never to give it up?" The Shinigami looked at Kyuubi and thought for a moment and said, "You do bring up a good question, Fox, and he can't cheat death forever." Kyuubi smiled and said, "How about giving him a reason to give it up then?" The Shinigami looked at Naruto and asked, "What do you have in mind?" Kyuubi smiled a feral smile and said, "You do know of Orochimaru, right?" Shinigami narrowed his eyes and said, "Of course I know that foolish mortal. He is causing me a lot of headaches." Kyuubi said, "Then how about a trade of sorts? The kid here, when he finally gets a life he likes, gives up his phoenix power, as well as gives you that headache Orochimaru, and he gets something that only you can give him." Naruto narrowed his eyes, as he looked at the two being talked and was going to say something, but Kyuubi made him promise not to say anything until he was gone. A last request to allow the Kyuubi some peace and pride before he left. Shinigami asked, "And what might that fox be?" With contempt in his voice. Kyuubi said, "His father Rashikazama. Allow him to live out a normal mortal life that he would have had if I had not attacked. You get Orochimaru to play with, and the heavenly power back, and Naruto gets his parents back, since we don't know who his mother is." Shinigami thought for a moment and looked at Naruto, judging him, and walked over to Naruto and put his hand on Naruto's forehead and said, "Agreed." And Naruto cried out in pain. Then flashback. Naruto said, "And when I woke up Kyuubi was gone, and I had the knowledge to bring Dad back. I was waiting until I knew I had everything I needed to let us be a family, and had to wait to learn who you were before I attempted it, Mom." They both nodded, and Rin asked, "So, what are you doing here? You know you have the exams still going on." Naruto sighed and said, "I got careless, and Kakashi caught me putting memories in Sasuke and Sakura's head about what happened, so they don't suspect it." Arashi paled and said, "How much did you tell him?" Naruto smirked at that and said, "I only told him about the temporary memory transfer. I have never told anyone about the other one." Rin looked at both of them in confusion, and Arashi smiled and said, "Well, my little claw, you know how his memory can only replace up to a week's worth of memories that can be real or fake." She nodded and he continued, "There's another version that transfers most of your memories. Naruto has used it enough that after he brought me to life he gave me all the memories for this life. It's like that sword he has. I know it has a lot of seals and stuff, but I don't know what they do, because he knew them before. I could take time and learn it, but I won't." Naruto nodded and said, "We are having company tonight for dinner. 7 p.m. Be ready, and next time use a damn privacy. We heard you both all the way to the tower." As he got up and went toward his room, leaving his parents blushing. It was almost 7 o'clock when Naruto walked downstairs. All of his guests had arrived, and his Kagebunshin had escorted them to the dining room. He sighed as he walked in, and took a seat at the head of the table, and put his hands together with everyone looking at him. He closed his eyes and opened them, making several people gasp in shock, never seeing anything like that. He looked at everyone around the table before closing them and opening them again, showing his normal eyes. Kakashi sighed and said, "So what are we all doing here for now, Naruto, and what was that with your eyes?" The voice from the doorway said, "Good question, dipshit," making everyone turn and pale, as the Yondaime Hokage walked into the room with his wife Rin on his arm, as they both sat beside Naruto on the left. On Naruto's right was Anko, Temari, and Kurenai around the circular table. Naruto smiled, as his clones brought in several different styles of meat, fish, and vegetables that were placed on a round robin in the center of the table, so everyone could get whatever they pleased. After the clones left, Naruto cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. He said, "Thank you all for coming on such short notice, but with everything that has happened, I felt that you each needed to know what has been happening. I know many of you may have a lot of questions like why you are all here, and how my father Yondaime is alive now, along with my eyes. I will answer all of those questions, but a few things need to be said. As you all know, we started the selection exams today. What you don't know is that we had S-class criminals in the exams preparing for the destruction of the Leaf Village." Several gasps were heard, and Shikamaru closed his eyes and said, "It was Orochimaru, wasn't it?" Everyone looked at him, and Naruto said yes, the late Orochimaru was one of them. He had come to the village to put a curse seal on Sasuke Uchiha to get the Sharingan. Shino said, "So that's why your teammates were replaced today," in a way of stating facts instead of asking a question. Inoichi asked, "What do you mean the late Orochimaru?" Naruto smiled and said, "I killed him today, and, as part of an agreement with the death god, I was allowed to bring my father back to life, as payment for Orochimaru." They had ticked him off. Arashi smiled and said, "Perhaps it would be best if you told them everything, starting with the reason Kyuubi attacked and his true fate." This got everyone's attention, and Naruto said to Hish Hyuga, "What do you know about the birth of the Sharingan?" Everyone turned to look at Hish, and he said, "It is a mutation of my family bloodline. That is common knowledge." "Why?" narrowing his eyes. Naruto said, "You're right until you get to the mutation part. It was changed on purpose. I guess it's best to start with a Hyuga named Hyuga Madara, who later became Uchiha Madara, the first Uchiha." Kakashi said, "What does this history lesson have to do with anything in Naruto?" Naruto said, "Everything, considering the asshole is still alive today, and is currently the leader of a group of S-class criminals known as Atasuki." Hish started to stand up and said, "I have no intention of wasting my time listening to your stories." As he turned to leave, Naruto closed his eyes and asked, "Have you ever wondered how they knew where Hinata's room was that night, Hish?" Making everyone look at him, and Hish, Niji, and Hinata tensed. Hish turned and in a cold voice said, "Be care." He was stopped when a blast of Kai hit him from Naruto, and Naruto sighed before saying, "I was not going to show you this yet, but you forced my hand, Hyuga." Naruto then snapped his fingers and several clones walked into the room with several scrolls, and Naruto stopped the Kai and reached for a scroll, and walked to Hish, and handed it to him, and said, "I also have info on the real reason your wife is dead. If you will sit and listen, I will share it with you. Unless you want her murderer to get away with it." Before turning and taking his seat again. After Hish calmed down enough, he opened the scroll and read it before paling it, and asked, "How did you come by this?" Naruto closed his eyes and said, "When I stole the Cloud Village's forbidden scroll, I had already heard about that event, and I broke into their record office and got that along with some other things." Everyone looked at him like he was crazy, and Hanabi asked, "What is in that scroll, father?" Naruto said the agreement between a Hyuga council member and a Reikage to kidnap Hinata, as well as the contact to tell the security of the house, as well as getting blueprints for her room. It was part 1 of 5 plans the Hyuga Council has to eliminate not only Hish, but his twin brother, Hinata, Hanabi, as well as the true events of how mother was murdered. Hish sat down and motioned for his family too also, and he said, "You have my attention." Naruto nodded and said to Hinata, "When you think of things, what does it really feel like in your head?" Everyone turned to look at her, and she thought for a moment and said, "It's hard to concentrate at times, and my head hurts a lot." Naruto smiled and said, "Not surprising with the inhibitor seal you had placed on you," making several people who knew seals flinch. Hish looked at Naruto and asked, "What do you mean?" Naruto said, "I only learned this thanks to my spy network I set up while I was traveling with my family. Jiraiya's is good, but mine is unstoppable." For those of you who don't know what an inhibitor seal is, it is a control seal that is often put on psychotic criminals that people can't kill to make them unable to act properly. However, that is only the first part. When combined with a chakra nullifier seal, it turns the victim into a mental time bomb that will kill itself eventually. I learned that Hinata had these seals placed on her the day she was born, and they are under the same type that Tsunade uses. I also learned that Hanabi has them also. Her mother died when she saw a Hyuga council member doing the sealing. He killed her to keep her quiet, but he was to help kill her later anyways. Hinata asked, "What do you mean?" in a stuttery voice. Naruto sighed and asked Hish, can I remove those two seals off of Hinata, so she won't stutter anymore? Hish nodded and Naruto got up and motioned for Hinata to do also. He looked at her and said, I need you to put your arms above your head, and I am sorry in advance, but it will hurt, and also I have to touch above your heart. You understand what that means, right? She looked down and nodded, and Naruto pulled out his sword and sat it across his arms, as he put his hand on the back of her neck and over her heart and closed his eyes, and suddenly green, red, and blue chakras surrounded his hands, and Hinata screamed for a moment, and that's all it took. As the seals broke, he then removed his hands and put his sword back in its sheath, and he looked at her and asked, so how do you feel? Hinata blinked a few minutes and said in a calm collected voice, like for the first time I can think clearly. Thank you. As she bowed, Naruto waved it off and said, we are both equals, Hinata, you don't need to bow to me. Anyways, I know I have a lot to tell and have raised many questions, so I think we should continue. As he turned and started to sit down only for Hish asked what was the sword for. Naruto smirked and said, I will answer that later, Hish. I don't want to make everyone think my name for my sword is the burden I used to bear. Smirking, as several eyebrows rose at that. Kakashi, who was rubbing his temples, sighed and said, is anyone here not lost? Looking around the room seeing many faces just as confused as him. Naruto poured himself a glass of sake and drank it and said, I guess I can cut a lot of the questions out. Kakashi, pull out that damn book of yours and tell me if you see anything unusual about it. Everyone turned to look at Kakashi, as he pulled out his copy of the new Ichigo Paradise book. He looked at it for several moments and said no, why? Naruto smiled and said I love seals. I will let you all in on a little secret. Over my time away from the village at the age of 5, I made a lot of money doing odd jobs. During my time I bought a lot of business where I currently have close to $10 million deposited in my account every day. 2 such companies are publishing companies. One of them makes the book Kakashi is currently holding. I had a seal designed into the cover of each book published by those companies, and unless you know how to make it appear nobody ever will know of it. The seal is simple. I record anything anyone who has it says within 5 feet of the book. I have a scroll I made that absorbs encodes, and by telling the scroll what I want to know all the info on that will appear. Say I want information on anything related to the village of Konoha that anyone has said in the last 90 days, my scroll will make appear. Do you get what I am saying now? Comprehension dawned on everyone's faces and they all looked at him, and Shino Dad said, that would mean that you can spy on almost anyone from anywhere. Naruto nodded and said, that's how I found out about Orochimaru coming today, as well as his plans. I also learned about the truth of certain events in the Hyuga Council because they discuss them, and one member talks out loud when he writes in his journal. Naruto reached into his stack of scrolls and opened one and read, today that bitch hidden discovered me when I was putting the seal on the new little head member. I had to dispose of her with a strike to the heart. I made the nurse tell Hish that she died from complications during delivery. The fool. We should have killed him after we arranged for his brother to be killed. Soon our plan will be complete, and we won't have a clan head any longer. The council will take its rightful place, as the leaders of the clan and anyone not on the council will receive the caged bird seal. He rolled up the scroll, and Niji asked who. Naruto said Hyuga Haman, the head of the council. They discovered Hiashi and his brother's plan to unite the Hyuga clan, so they made a deal with Cloud. They also made it where Hish would get out of council meetings during the kidnapping. They knew he always took a walk after the meetings, so they set him up. Afterwards they talked your father into sacrificing himself to save his brother. They planned it so Hish would not get rid of that damn seal you have on your head and remove their power. Without the threat of that seal they would lose what power they have and become useless. Inoichi said, as much as we all like learning the dark secrets of the Hyuga clan, why did you invite all of us here? Naruto smiled and said thank you. Simple really. Even with my father alive again, me and my 2 grandparents who are Sanins, after my marriages to my fiancés here, we will still be one of the weakest families in the village. I am no fool and I know the hatred the villagers hold for Kyuubi will not ever go away even with threats, so I am looking for a way to protect my future family. No matter how strong we each are, we can't be everywhere and we could die at any time, so I want my family to have the protection of the other clans. Especially any children. I don't want them to have to go through what I did. I know you are all thinking that sounds good and all, but what's in it for us? Why should we risk our necks for your clan? That is why in exchange for protection should the need ever arise I have something you all will love. He reached over to a tray of scrolls that were all nice and neat, and said today during the exams. How many of you heard me brag about winning something in a poker game? Everyone looked around and Hinata said you said you won 20 summoning contracts. Naruto smiled at the now confident Hinata and said yes. It is not known, but if a summoning family is not happy with their current summoners they can find an arbitrator, to find them a new summoner. I discovered this when talking with my 2 main summons. Toads and Slugs, and I was able to set up a challenge to prove I was worthy of being the arbitrator. I passed and got them, so I am willing to give them to your clans based on the summons, as well as 10 of whatever element the head of the clan is aligned to. Arashi smirked and said how many do you have in that library? Naruto smiled knowing his dad knew this answer to make everyone bug-eyed, as he said I only have a little over 11,000. Giving each of the clans 10 won't affect our library. Ino asked how do you have so many? Naruto took another sip of sake and said simple really. I stole every village, but this one in Suna's forbidden scroll, as well as copied everyone in their libraries, and traded with missing nin on my travels, unless I was hunting them. It's quite easy actually. Inoichi said there's no way you could have done that. It would have taken hundreds of people, as well as incredible skills to do that. Naruto placed his hand on his sword and disappeared from sight, and returned a moment later holding 4 huge scrolls, and said here are the forbidden scrolls from Iwa, Cloud, and Mist, and Rain Village. As for the libraries I know that create duplicates of any document, and whenever I can make 1000 of cage bunchins at a time taking out all the in a library can be done in as little as 15 minutes at night. Then I just flash step out of the village, and no one is the wiser until I am long gone. As for my skills, I am very talented. In fact this house we are all in. Hiyashi, if you would be so kind as to look outside at our surroundings and tell everyone what you see, since no one came through the front door. Hish gasped and said, where are we? We are in a tree a few hundred feet in trees. Naruto said yes, my family home I built is hidden by a powerful seal, so even though I tell you this house is in the forest of death, unless you know exactly where you will never find it. As for being off the ground I use my bloodline to do that. Now I will answer a few questions before we get to business. You ask what was with my eyes. To answer that, I have completely absorbed all of the power and knowledge of the Kyuubi no Kitsune that my father sealed inside me the day after I was born. With that I learned to make my family bloodline stronger, so that every one of my children will be able to control plants instead of a random one. The eyes I created to battle the final level of the Sharingan, so I can kill 3 Uchiha. Everyone was looking and Ino said, why are you going to kill Sasuke? Naruto chuckled and said, why would I kill that sterile jerk? Kakashi asked, what do you mean sterile, and there are only 2 Uchiha left? Sasuke and his brother, so who are you talking about? Getting several nods. Naruto sighed and said, when we were on the mission to Wave, I had to check Sasuke for injuries, and I ran a medical and learned that he was sterile. As for the 3 Uchiha I mentioned, I am planning on killing Uchiha Madara before he tries and destroys the world by releasing his master, the 10-tailed demon. The next one I plan to kill is Uchiha Itachi. The last one will make you Kakashi, my mother Rin and my father Arashi upset. Arashi looked at him and asked, what do you mean son? Naruto looked at them and said the last one I will kill is Tobi or, as you know him, Uchiha Obito. Kakashi slammed his fist on the table, Rin gasped and Arashi paled and he said, but Obito's died. I saw his body. Naruto said you're right, he was a dead father. Madara used a version of Orochimaru Kuchius. Ito Tensei, summoning. In pure world resurrection, to bring him back to life, but he was fused with another person who was mentally disturbed, and he has the brains of a 7-year-old child. But the skills to fight a. He is also completely under the one who brought him back to life. Uchiha Madara. The same one who offered 100 of his descendants, as payments to Kyuubi for the Sharingan, to free him from the Hyuga caged bird seal. That's the reason Kyuubi attacked back then. To get his payment. Everyone was sitting, absorbing all the information and Hish said you have given me a lot to think about. I am curious about summoning contracts, as well as. Kakashi, who finally got over his shock of learning the person who gave him his eye was still alive, asked what about that memory you used today? Naruto sighed and said like I told you I implanted a fake memory in both of their brains, so they think they took the test, and then we defeated a team from Mist, before making it to the tower. I also implanted a memory for Sasuke to blame for being sterile, so perhaps someday someone might be able to fix him or something. Inoichi asked what kind of things do you do? Naruto smirked, as he knew he had one, and said it's a version of your family that allows you to enter a person's mind. I ran into a man who was friends with one of your ancestors when he was a child, and he modified it so he could implant 1 week's worth of fake memories, so that way he could hide from hunter nins, by making them think they got a lot of him heading somewhere else, and then he goes elsewhere. Inoichi said instead of an element, would you give me that one with whatever summon you want to give me? Naruto smiled and said sure, the cats will love your family. They hate their current summoners with a passion and won't answer them because of the crime they committed. Inoichi asked who are their current summoners and what crime is that? Naruto said though the ones that are alive right now don't know they have it. The Uchiha clan are their current summoners, and the crime that was sealing 30 of the cats in our world after summoning so they can never return. One such cat every person here has seen once and never realized it was a summoned creature. Making Inoichi's eyes get big, as he heard who their summoners were. He then asked who is the summon we all saw, but have not realized it. Naruto chuckled and then turned to full-blown laughter, and he looked at Kakashi, and asked what was our first mission that I made Cage Bunch and henge into Kakashi. Kakashi thought for a moment and his one eye got big, and he said you mean to tell me. Naruto smirked and said, why do you then I told her Sasuke was, an Uchiha in cat language, so she would attack him. Ino asked who are you talking about? Kakashi said one word and everyone paled toward. Arashi spit out his drink and said that damn cat is still around. Naruto said now and forever thanks to the Uchihas. Naruto on a roll said well, since it was stolen by a branch member from your family 200 years ago, the Hyuga will get the Falcon contract again, making his eyes get big. Naruto continued the Apurum clan will get the only bug summon that rivaled them during the last war. The B contract from Iwa. Anko, you will get the snake contract, and don't worry about having to give human sacrifices like Orochimaru did. He only did that after Orochimaru started summoning his children to experiment on. The Akamichi family will get the Boar contract from Cloud. The Nara clan will get the Hulk contract. Kakashi, you have until I count to 5 to ask her out on a date, or you can kiss your contract goodbye, and I will tell her. Puckin is tired of hearing you moan about wanting to date her, and I am tired of getting it in my reports from my scrolls. 1 2 3 4 5 Kakashi looked confused, and Naruto said okay Jikenshit, Hana, Dipshit over there has the hots for you, but he won't tell you about it. Kiba jumped up and said what the hell cuz? That's my sister. Naruto said shut it cuz, Hana has liked him also, but said I could threaten Kakashi with his contract to get him off his case. He has run up a high mental doctor bill. As for you cuz, same deal, tell her you're toast. 1 2 3 4 5. Kiba jumped up and said Hinata, will you go out with me? Making everyone sweat drop and Hinata red face, as she said I will think about it. Kiba growled and turned to Naruto and said I am going to kid. His words were stopped by Naruto appearing behind him, and Choji asked what are you doing? I can't keep up with it. Arashi said no one can. Calmly and in a low voice that everyone heard. Kakashi asked is it? Arashi said no. Naruto created the ultimate there. He calls it flash step. It makes my Hiraishin look like I was running without weight compared to the real Hiraishin. Naruto sighed and said chill cuz. Even I have to pay my prices for things. I made a deal with the summons so I had to follow through. Kiba asked then why did you tell me? Naruto smiled and said tell him. Barking could be heard in Hana, Rin and her sister all three sweat dropped as Akamaru was talking to Kiba. While everyone was busy talking Naruto walked over to Niji and slipped a scroll into his hand and mouth read in private. As he walked by him and took his seat, he turned and said that just leaves the Naras and the Inizuka. Both of you should feel honored with your contracts. The Naras were awarded the Golem summons. They respect knowledge and have not had a summoner in over 300 years. The Inuzuka's clan was asked to receive this contract, but no one would ever offer it to them for fear of being attacked. Hana asked what summon is it? Naruto said the lion summons. The last person they had to come to give it to your clan though lions and dogs would not get along because of them being from 2 main affiliates. That's all of them and of course the 10 as well so we have a deal. Each of them looked at each other and...
That's it for today guys. I hope you enjoyed my video and see you in the next part of this video. Till then, sayonara.